Welcome into another edition of DNVR Rams Live, presented by our friends at Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com, use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. Last show of July. That means football is officially here. I always associate August 1st with the start of football. It's kind of like when the youth practices start up. You're close to the high school season. Obviously, we're about a month out from the start of the college season and NFL. I think the first preseason game is actually tonight, which is honestly such a godsend. I've been craving it. I've been ready for a couple of weeks now. I always need a little bit of a reset after the Super Bowl, especially just with how all consuming coverage is when you do it for a living. But I really don't have a hankering for football in the spring. I mean, we have spring practices. We talk about it a little bit, but I haven't been able to get into the spring leagues or anything like that. But right around, summer, after you get that palate cleanse, this year in particular, it was kind of a unique palate cleanse, given that I got to cover the NHL playoffs. But I'm back. I'm ready. Camp starts tomorrow. I cannot wait. It's going to be a blast. We're going to have all kinds of content coming your way in the next couple of weeks. I believe we're going to have Jay Norvell in studio next week, which is awesome. Potentially John Weber as well. So I'll give you guys an update on that. That'll be next Thursday. So really looking forward to that. I will be on vacation for a couple of days next week, so we will have one pre-recorded show. But I'll still be at camp a couple of days next week as well. So lots of new stuff coming your way. Before we get into everything, I did want to promote a pickleball tournament that we have this weekend. It's at the Chicken Pickle in Thornton from 10 to 1. It's an opportunity to help us raise funds for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Colorado. So a great opportunity. Grab your paddle, gather your friends, get ready to play your heart out for a good cause. Some nice creative writing there from whoever made that ad, but it really is a really cool opportunity. So if you don't have anything going on this Saturday, maybe go play some pickleball and help us raise funds for Big Brothers Big Sisters of Colorado. I also want to pump the newsletter. If you're not following that, you can subscribe daily for free. There will be a lot of college football commentary in there. It's not just CSU football. It's everything Denver sports in your inbox every morning in less than 5 minutes. So I do cover, CU in there as well. I cover everything. It's kind of a fun little outlet for me to talk about some of the stuff that I don't get to always focus on this show. One of the things I pointed out this morning was that in 2024, CSU, CU, and the Broncos actually finished above 500 and qualified for the postseason for just the second time in the 21st century. It happened in 2005 as well. You'd have to go all the way back to 75 and 76 to find a time in which all three teams finished above 500 in consecutive years. So that's only happened one time ever. There are a lot of instances where each team does it 2 times in 3 years, or one team finished 500 or just below 500 and it messed it up. But an opportunity for the entire state really to enjoy football, I think, this fall, which is going to be a lot of fun. I'm definitely looking forward to it. Josh in the Toyota chat says, I start to watch highlights when I know football is around the corner. I also rewatched the 2016 Triple Overtime Classic between Wyoming and UNLV on occasion. One of the great all-time random Mountain West games, early Josh Allen, I believe. So that's a nice little throwback to look back on. I love doing stuff like that, just going back and watching some random ones. I'll get on a streak there, and I'll start putting on like 2005 Air Force type stuff, some stuff I got to go to as a kid. I'm definitely a sucker for that. But all of that is to say that football is here. Can't wait. That's mostly what we're going to be focusing on today, but I did want to hit on hoops a little bit here at the beginning of the show. I was able to attend practice yesterday for, close to about an hour and a half. They got some good work in. It's obviously early in the process, but you can tell that some of the transfers are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable. We're going to play an interview with Brandon Rechsteiner in a couple of minutes. One of the guys that'll push for that starting point guard role came over from Virginia Tech in the offseason. He did some extra shooting after the fact. He's got a really simple release with his jump shot, which I love for a guy who's, not the biggest guard in the world. He's swole. He's probably the most jacked guard on the team. He's got biceps for days. Not surprising when you recognize the wrestling background and, everybody in his family being involved in WWE. His cousin Braun Breaker going to be one of the headliners in SummerSlam this weekend. So if you're looking for a place to watch that, you can come down to the DNVR bar as well. But he seems like a good dude. I'm getting to know all of these transfers a little bit, and I'm enjoying that process. It is a little bit weird. Just it was a lot of the same faces for years and years, both players and staff wise. Obviously, Ali is still the guy, but it is a little bit different. I will say, just from a stature standpoint, visually, when you look at these guys, it looks more like a vintage San Diego State or New Mexico team, top to bottom. I think this is the biggest and most athletic roster that the Rams have had. They don't have a true dominant rim protector. I like the depth of the front court. I think particularly last year we saw how advantageous that was in some of those matchups against teams like San Diego State, where the Rams had, historically at times been bullied in some of those types of games. The guard play throughout Nico's tenure has been pretty solid. Great under Isaiah, obviously, but even what, Neek and Jay Lake and some of those guys did last year was great. But when you look at the guards across the board, they don't have any small guys out there this year. It does feel a lot more like a San Diego State style team. Like, they're not going to play that brand of basketball, obviously. Still going to be CSU hoops and what you're accustomed to, but there's no small dudes out there, and they're going to have really solid length. I think it's going to be a big asset on the defensive side, but even offensively, I just think this is going to be a team that, from a physicality standpoint, is not going to get pushed around by really anybody. I mean, yeah, you don't have Shaq out there in the post, but I love what they've got in the front court. I think the guards are intriguing as a group, and I'm interested to see how all of this plays out, because they've got a lot of guys that are going to be capable of playing some type of role on this team. And I think there are going to be talented players who end up having smaller roles than they're, potentially capable of filling. And that's a strength to have that much depth on your roster. It's also a challenge for the coaching staff to get everybody to buy into that, especially as the season goes on. Guys aren't necessarily playing the types of roles that they hope for, but I mean, that's where you try and lean on your quality coaching staff, and then, hopefully they're able to get them to buy into that. Actually, an interview we're about to play with Kyle Jorgensen, one of the returners from last season, he talked about that, how it was a bit of a challenge for him last year. He kind of got forced onto the floor early out of necessity. In the second half of the season, really wasn't playing a ton. And that, for a freshman, you got to remember all these guys at the high school ranks are the dude on their high school team. It can be a little bit of a humbling process. And that's where you need a staff that's able to keep everybody on track and make sure that the message is not only being delivered, but it's being received from the players as well, and they understand exactly what's happening. And Kyle talked about how Ali, but also, he gave a lot of credit to Nico and Cooley and some of those guys who are at Minnesota now, did a good job of really laying it all out for him and kind of helping him understand what his role was going to be on any given night to night. I don't want to get too carried away in terms of observations from practice or anything like that, because it's July. We don't know who the starting five is going to be. We're not going to know for a couple of months, and it really doesn't matter. I will say the returners all look really good. They all look like they're in great shape, but also you can just see there's a maturity to these guys, both from conversations with them and just the way they operate, throughout practice, seeing a lot of communication, seeing guys hold each other accountable. That's always an encouraging sign. But I think, looking at Jorgensen and Bemba, both those guys look like they're in, better shape than they were a year ago. Jorgensen, it makes sense, especially given that he was a true freshman. That's going to be tough. He honestly played before he was physically ready and flashed some pretty great skill while doing so. So I really think the sky is a limit for him offensively. Defensively, he's got a lot of room to grow, but that's going to come with time. That's going to come with doing the right things in the weight room and taking care of your body. And again, all these guys appear to be doing exactly that. I'm pretty high on the potential of Darnez Slater and Jonathan McConan. I think both those guys are kind of potential wild cards for the team this year. I'd throw Jace Butler and Kerry Booth into that mix as well. They're all guys who I think you can be competitive even if those guys aren't playing huge roles for you, but I think all of them have high ceilings. They all have various things that they need to refine. But I again, there are going to be no charity minutes, and it's only going to, raise the ceiling of this team because there's so many guys that they can throw out. They've got a lot of versatile combinations. They've got some guys with positional versatility. It's all very intriguing. Now, how all of this comes together is still TBD. But I'm really high on Jevin Muniz. I think him and Augie and Pasquarelli could play overseas professionally right now. I'm not saying they'd start in Spain or anything like that, but those are guys that could play basketball, at a professional level right now. I think they're going to be day one, just hit the ground running. They're really intelligent. They're really versatile. A lot of those guys have some ball handling possibilities. I'm intrigued, but keep an eye on Darnell Slater and McConan as much attention as the transfers are going to get, and as exciting as some of these guys are. I mean, I do think there's a world in which both those guys play pretty big roles. The last thing I want to say before we play an interview with Kyle Jorgensen is that I just want everyone to remember they need to keep their expectations tempered when it comes to Kerry Booth. Athletically, physically out there, he stands out. I mean, he's just a different caliber of athlete than we've seen at CSU, talking about guys that, look like they would have been on one of those vintage San Diego State teams. Athletically, when it comes to his frame, he's definitely that. He's going to have some moments where that really flashes, maybe a shot block, or I really think he's going to poster somebody at some point this season. He's already thrown a couple of dunks in practice that definitely, have my jaw on the ground, but he needs to refine his game, as his handle's got to be a lot tighter. You can see him thinking out there still. He's a really young player that just needs time to develop. He's not going to be Neat Clifford right away. He's going to play more of that 4 role anyways, but I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if they go with some bigger lineups at times and maybe slide him into the 3. That's a different tangent, but just be patient with him. His ceiling is incredibly high. The player he is today is not the player that I think a lot of the fan base hopes he will be someday, if that makes sense. And I just think based on the absurd ascension we saw from Neat Clifford and how much growth we saw from him, that can just create some unrealistic expectations. And I just want everybody to be patient with him. I think he's a guy, if he stays 2 years, the NBA vision is very much a possibility, but he's still very raw at this point in time, and he's going to need some time to develop. So just be patient. That's really all I want to say. Josh in the chat says, does the team run a 10-man rotation at all? I think so, man. I think you're going to have at least 10 guys that are, really like 11 potentially that could play for you. I think you refine that as you get deeper into the season. When the league slate comes around, I don't know if you're going that deep off the bench, but I think that's going to be one of the fun things in the non-conference slate, is seeing how this rotation sorts itself out. And it would not surprise me if the rotation that we see, in November, early December, is pretty drastically different than what we see, in February, March, because I do think there's a possibility that some of these young guys or some of these transfers who are looking to come in and grow, make a big leap over the course of the season. But I think early on, especially, you lean on those returners in the front court. You lean on some of the guys who have been in your program, somebody like Darnell Slater, and then, some of those more dependable veterans or just more proven veterans, I guess would be the more fair way to phrase it. Some of those guys I just talked about, Jevin Muniz and Pasquarelli and Augie, I think those are kind of who you lean on early on in the season. And I think there's going to be some ebbs and flows. I don't think it'll be quite as drastic as it was last year. Hopefully it's a little bit more in the middle, but I do think that the ceiling for this group is potentially pretty high in a year where it feels pretty wide open in the Mountain West. San Diego State's going to be the clear-cut favorite on paper. Boise, New Mexico lost a ton, but I still think they'll both be good. Utah State's been very sustained of late, but CSU will be right there in the mix as well. We're going to play some interviews here before we transition over to football. We do need to take a quick break and shout out a couple of our partners. Then we'll play those basketball interviews. Then we'll focus on football for the rest of the show. If you've got any questions, comments, keep them firing in the Toyota chat. If I don't get to it right away, like this question on Brousseau and Curry, I promise you we will come back around at the end of the show. Cake is the business owner's home mortgage partner. They specialize in non-QM loans. If you're a regular employee of a company, you get a W-2. It's all very standard. Then when you go to apply for loans, when you go to refinance, things like that, it's very simple because you can prove your income. Lenders love this. There's not a lot of hoops that they've got to hop through in order to make it happen. It can be a little bit more complicated for business owners, for people who work independently. It can be a little bit more challenging to prove that steady income. The solution, Kate can get business owners approved by validating their cash flow through bank statements, certified profit and loss statements, or their business tax returns. This is good for creative professionals. It's good for independent contractors, freelancers, anybody who works on their own, essentially. Head to the link in our description to get started. Cake Mortgage Corporation, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 1734623. Licensed in Colorado by the Division of Real Estate. Terms and conditions do apply. I also want to shout out our homies at Game Time. Game Time, our longtime partners. Nobody makes it easier to get tickets to your favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You name it, they've got it. Game Time's got a little bit of everything. The Game Time exclusive zone deals can help you save even more. If you're planning on going to the World Cup, you should definitely check this out. You can save 10% off with the exclusive zone deals for the FIFA World Cup matchups next summer. Game Time Picks curation function makes it easier to save than ever. They've got so many different things that they offer that at times, if you're in a hurry, it could maybe be a little bit overwhelming. But with the Game Time Picks function, boom, it's just going to cut all of that out, show you the best of the best. You can get a panoramic view of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting into. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code DNVR for $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Create that account, redeem the code DNVR for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. We're going to get into football in just a second. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat. I appreciate all of you rocking with us. I did want to play these interviews. One, just to give you guys a chance to, get to know some players who we didn't focus on quite as much last year. Jorgensen, we certainly talked about, but it was a lot of talk about, Clifford and Lake. And a chance to meet one of the newcomers in Rechsteiner. It was a process this morning. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to send 4K video files, but spent about 2 hours trying to do it over AirDrop, over Slack, over email, over iMessage, updated the phone and the laptop. None of it would work. We finally got it through. So part of this is purely rooted in stubbornness. It took me forever to get these interviews in here. So we're playing them, damn it. Here's the first interview, though, with Kyle Jorgensen, and then we'll play one with Brandon Rechsteiner after that. Modern college basketball, you have options. Your coach obviously moved on to Minnesota, but Ali gets the gig. What made you want to stay at CSU?
I think there's multiple factors when it comes into it. I think obviously the people here, like second to no other. The coaching staff is awesome. Ali's awesome. And I give credit to Medvin and Cool, those guys. They're awesome too. I have a lot of love for those guys. I still talk to them a lot, but it was a tough decision at the end of the day. But I followed my heart, and it told me to stay here. I talked to Ali a ton. As soon as Medved left, Ali was texting me, calling me, man. He was like, hey, I want you here. And honestly, that means a lot to me. It shows his care and it shows his love for a guy like me. I was just a freshman last year, and to see our relationship grow to be that special is something special for sure.
What do you feel like you learned the most about yourself last year? Not a lot of freshmen get to be a part of a run like that.
I would say kind of that, the season has a lot of up and downs, and it's a long season. Obviously in high school, you're kind of just the guy the whole year round. But, I was put in a lot of different situations, I was starting. I was starting against, teams like Washington and big time teams. And then towards the end of the year, I wasn't really playing. So just kind of knowing that, just be ready when my time is called. Just staying ready. Medved was super great at talking to me and letting me know, hey, you're going to be in this role today. I want you to be ready. They were super helpful with that. So I would say just to be ready for anything, for sure. One day I played 25, and the next game I played 8 minutes. So
was that hard?
At the beginning, yes, I'd say, because it kind of messed with my mental play a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. That was the first time I've kind of experienced something like that. Kind of just experienced hey, you got to set it back. You got to just dial it down a little bit. And it does affect you a little bit at first, but that's something that, as a freshman, you kind of have to learn. Medved put in the great words. He's like, since you've never been through something like it, the first time's going to hurt, and it's going to be terrible for a little bit. But, like I said, they were great with everything.
sort of in that vein, how different do you feel like now compared to a year ago, just for all the both physical, mental, kind of ups and downs that go with college basketball?
Yeah, I have a better mindset about it. It helps me have coaches like Ali that are in my ear talking about, hey, I want you to shoot more. Like, I want you to do more. Like, you got to be. It's something like they were saying I was being too selfish or too unselfish. Like, I was looking to pass too much. Like, you got to look for your own shot. Like, so I remember yesterday, Ali and Coach Dave came up to me like, yo, like, you're open. Let it fly, man. Like, just let it fly. And like that means a lot to me because as a freshman, as a young guy, you're kind of just doing whatever you're told, and you're trying to just be on the court. But now this year, I'm excited. I got a bigger role. I put on a couple pounds of muscle. My mental game is stronger. I've been working on that, so I'm just really excited to kind of show my new side. Obviously, I still got a lot of work to do, but I'm excited. JP's been great. He's been helping me so much. I think I put on like 10 or 11 pounds of muscle, so I'm feeling better than ever, and I'm ready to go.
I was going to say a lot of time with JP this summer.
For sure. On the first day of summer, he said there's not going to be a lot of room between my foot and your ass. So, I mean, he wasn't wrong, but, it's something I've never been afraid of the work. I embrace something like that, and these guys around here. Look at there's people still shooting, and we just had a tough practice. We were running off practice, and Brandon's getting extra shots. Everybody's getting open shots. So it's easy when you have a culture like this to want to work hard.
What's your impression of Brandon and some of these new guys?
They've been great. I mean, they really embrace hard work, and it makes me want to. Like I said, it makes me want to work harder. It makes us want to work harder, and I think, like the coaches kind of said before, we were ahead than we are last year. We're understanding the offense more. We're understanding the defense. It's just those little things that, you see a little bit of miscommunication sometimes. I mean, we're still in the second month, so we still got some time. But yeah, I'm super excited for our future. I think we're going to be great this year. I think that we have the right pieces to be great and the great mindset. So,
thank you.
Appreciate Kyle for giving us a couple minutes of his time. I had the music pop up at one point there. It's all part of live TV, right? You're doing the interviews in the middle of a practice. There's going to be a little bit of chaos at times, but an introspective Kyle Jorgensen going into year 2. Great to get his perspective. Great quote as well, talking about the strength coach, Jason Phillips, and him saying how his foot's not going to be too far from Kyle's ass over the course of the summer. You can tell all these guys are comfortable. Some of the younger players have come out of their shells a little bit. They're excited to have bigger roles, and it's a good vibe. It's a good vibe over there in Moby Arena. We're going to play one more interview here with Brandon Rechsteiner, who transferred over from Virginia Tech, son of legendary wrestler Scott Steiner, aka Big Papa Pump. Hoping we see him at Moby at some point this fall / winter, spring. Basketball kind of happens throughout all of them. But here is that interview with Brandon Rechsteiner.
All right, I guess just first things first, what is your impression of life in Fort Collins to this point?
Yeah, man, it's really calm. Like, I'm from the city, so it's very calm and very family oriented. Like, the coaches will text me. I'm really close with all of them, so they'll text me like at all times of the day. Just got some good people in my circle out here, so it's really good.
What was it about CSU as a program that kind of sold you on it?
Just the potential for me and potential for the team. The program's like in an upward trajectory, and that's kind of what you want to look for when you're transferring to another school. I've seen what they've been doing, but also like it's only going up. We're moving to the Pac-12. We're a lot more people are starting to know who the Rams are. So when I got the opportunity, it was like a no-brainer.
When new players come in, a lot of times talk about the system, and it could be kind of complex learning the offensive system and everything. Yeah. What's it been like for you, and how do you feel now compared to 2 months ago?
Yeah, like the first few days, I was like, dang, this is kind of like more complicated than I thought it would be. And then, like, once I started watching film, especially like on Isaiah and just what Coach Ali wanted for me, it was like it's really like so easy for me. It's how I want to play, like in a lot of handoffs and me being able to go off the wall and shoot it. So, I mean, it's really easy for me. I like it.
Yeah, what is kind of your favorite parts of it when it does start to flow?
Yeah, my favorite is just how I can get off the ball, but I'll get it. I know I'm getting it back. A lot of times, like, if you get off the ball, you might not get it back. But like here, it's like you want to get off the ball, and that's my favorite part because as a point guard, I got to get off the ball, initiate the offense. But with my ability to score, especially on this team, it's like that's kind of what we need. So that it just makes it way more simpler. It doesn't look like I'm being selfish or anything.
Has it been kind of getting acclimated with the teammates and everything?
Yeah, it's super easy. I mean, I had like a prior connection to a few guys like Jace. We were at a camp together, playing against Cary in the ACC, and then on my visit, I was with Sean, and it's just like everyone else is very welcoming, very like similar guys to what I kind of grew up around, so it's real easy for me.
Have you had a chance to interact with Isaiah or Nick or any of those guys?
Yeah, I probably talked to Nick for like 30 minutes the other day when he was here, just kind of sitting down with him while the other guys were playing pickup, and then I had dinner with Isaiah, probably talked to him for like 2 hours, so I sat right next to him, so it was like, and then I texted Isaiah on Instagram a little bit, so it's good for me.
What stands out when you talk with a guy like him? I mean, he's kind of considered the greatest player in program history.
Who, Nick or Isaiah?
Well, Nick's got an argument too now, but it was there, yeah.
Isaiah's like just a basketball head, very mature and like very humble. I think he talked about like every basketball game he played in here. Like he's just remembering everything, like certain plays, who did what to them. And he talked for like 2 hours. He's a basketball head, and it's kind of like how I am. It just shows me like if you want to be that good, like you just got to be all about the game.
How would you describe playing for Ali? Like, what is his coaching style like?
I mean, I don't really know too much yet, but like so far, very like players coach. Like I'll shoot a shot that's questionable, and just because like I'm learning the offense, learning my spots, and he'll be like, I like it, because he knows like if I'm doing that in March, like I probably shouldn't be out there. So very easy to play for him, and honestly like the perfect coach for me.
Awesome. You guys good?
Little chance to get to know Brandon Rechsteiner. I appreciate both those guys, him and Kyle Jorgensen, being very open with us, being very into the interviews. You know, sometimes you can get guys after practice, they're tired, they don't really want to play along. But I thought both those guys, very articulate, very sociable, which, you know, we appreciate. The access with the program's tremendous under Ali. Can pretty much go to practice whenever I want. You know, all those guys come up and shake our hands after practice. It's just a really good vibe going on in there. When you're around them behind the scenes, it really helps you understand exactly why this program has had the sustained success that they've had, and why, you know, they've been able to develop so many different guys, and you see the way that these guys just enjoy themselves out there. It's fun. You know, I think that can get lost in college sports occasionally. And there's guys out there having fun. You know, it's structured. They're working hard. It's not like the coaches are out there goofing off. You know, they'll get after you if you're not doing things the right way. But very, you know, player oriented, and, you know, I think a lot like playing, you know, in the Nuggets system. I think it incentivizes players to constantly be in motion, to cut, to do the little things, because like Rechsteiner pointed out, you know, you're going to get an opportunity to get that ball back. And I'm pretty intrigued by the potential of this roster this year. And I think, you know, expecting, or at least hoping for, an NCAA tournament is very much fair. Mark in the Toyota chat says, is Booth a junior or a sophomore? This is his third season, so he'll be going into his junior year. He does still technically have a red shirt, because he played right away at his last two stops, Penn State and Notre Dame. But yeah, he's a junior. One thing to keep an eye on, and my buddy Nicholas Toffelmeyer actually pointed this out, is in a couple of years, there's a possibility that fifth year is going to get approved for all these guys anyways. So some of these guys, you know, who knows, knock on wood, could be in the program even longer than we anticipate. All right. Focused a little bit longer on hoops than I intended to. I just love talking about that program. But we got a lot of CSU football stuff to hit on. So we're going to take one quick break, shout out a couple of more partners, then we are setting the scene for fall camp. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails or hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma. Check out the Land Cruiser. Both of those are sweet options. They've got 17 models, with all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also have more low and zero emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, though. Again, those Toyota SUVs take command on the road as well as the trail. Perfect for cruising around downtown. Perfect for inner city commuting, but also perfect if you want to hit the mountains, if you want to go out to the western slope, something like that. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. Just like CSU Hoops needs a home court advantage at Moby Arena, you need a home flooring advantage in your home. Empire Today can help you get it. Empire Today has flooring experts, dedicated flooring professionals who focus on flooring every single day. We've all been to those big box stores. You wander aimlessly. You have no idea if the people that are helping you have any idea what they're talking about. You're, fingers crossed this guy is actually somewhat knowledgeable, not just being moved around. Maybe he was in paint last week. He's going to be in gardening next week. You just never know. When you work with a company like Empire, they live and breathe flooring. They have experts who will be with you every single step of the way. It's just a whole different ball game. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. Some things are just better at home. DNVR listeners can receive a $350 discount when they use the promo code DNVR. You heard that right, a $350 discount with that code DNVR. Restrictions to apply. Visit EmpireToday/DNVR for full details. All right, let's get into it. Let's get into the camp preview here. I will say, I don't think there's a ton of massive question marks about this team in terms of, crazy position battles. I think more or less we have a pretty firm idea of who's in position to, be on that too deep. Now, there are a couple things that can change here and there throughout camp. And sometimes what you see in spring is not always a great representative of what you're going to see in the fall. You've got more guys on campus at this point. You brought in more transfers. The freshmen are here. So, there's an opportunity for certain different players to potentially earn their way onto the field over the next month. But I think the biggest question that really is going to be the thing everybody hits on throughout camp and really until we actually get a chance to see what this team looks like in action against another team is, what is the offense really going to look like? We've heard from Jay Norvell at media days how it's probably going to look a lot closer to the air raid routes that he talked about when he came in, a lot closer to what we saw in 2023 than, last year, where it's more of a pro style offense. You've got some West Coast influences in there, and they were effective. They ran the ball with consistency, and I don't think that's something that you just completely abandon, particularly given the amount of talent you have in that backfield. I'm really high on all those guys, and I think there's a world where if you use them right and effectively, you can keep everybody fresh. You can keep the defense off balance because stylistically you've got some versatility with the different guys that you have in the backfield. Justin Marshall, who's really been productive from the very first time we saw him kind of explode onto the scene late in that 2023 campaign against San Diego State and Air Force and some of those teams. Why had a nice game as well. He's a guy who in open space, incredibly dynamic. He's got great quickness, and he's tough to catch if you let him get in that open field. I also think, we've seen now with a pretty decent sample size that he's not built to be a running back that's going to give you 20 plus carries week after week. I think he's got a couple of those games in him per season. But I think the most effective way to use Justin Marshall will be in that 15 carry per game type range. And then I think, you've got another 15 to 20 that you have up for grabs at this point. I'm really high on Jalen Dupree, and we'll talk about him a little bit more when I highlight some players that I'm going to kind of have an eye on in particular over the next month. He is on that list. But, based on how much Lloyd Avant was getting hyped up, both at media days as well as, in the Phil Steele magazine preview. One of the things that's always interesting to me about that Phil Steele preview in particular is that conversation usually happens in April or May. So post spring ball, we have a chance to watch these guys in spring, but then, the coaches, they have a chance to go look at the film, reevaluate things. And after they've had a chance to kind of sit with everything and reassess it all, it gives them a little bit better idea of what that roster is going to look like by the time, week one comes around. There's always one or two guys that kind of interest me based on, how much their I don't know, focused on, in that Phil Steele preview. Lloyd Avon is somebody who I definitely was intrigued by in the spring. He looks the part. He offers you some spark in the return game as well, which I think helps his cause in terms of consistently being on the field. I think he's probably the most dynamic pass catcher out of the group, at least based on what I've seen to this point. So I think, there's a world where you get him involved, in some swing passes and then the screen game and stuff like that, and essentially have it be an extension of the run game, but technically part of the passing game. And between the tackles, like I think he's a solid back as well. I'm really high on this running back trio. So I know I kind of went on a little tangent there, but I don't think you just completely abandoned some of what you were able to establish last year. In fact, I would love to see them build off of it. I'd like to see more play action vertical shots. I'd like to see, them get a little bit creative and build off of some of the stuff that they did well last year, because I think it'll help you keep defenses on their toes better than we maybe saw at times late in the season. I think that offense got a little stagnant and predictable, and we saw over the last 2 weeks of the regular season, as well as the bowl game, they just weren't moving the ball with the same type of consistency. I felt like the defense was stacking the box a little bit more, and the Rams weren't really making them pay for it. Now in the bowl game, there's some other extenuating factors, like the fact that you lost your top 2 receivers going into that game to the portal didn't help your cause after, already losing Torrey Horton earlier in the year. You didn't have anybody really doing anything consistently at tight end. Like there's a lot of reasons that the passing offense wasn't great, and maybe the staff as a result didn't trust it, but then, all of that kind of compounds, and the offense just was too predictable, not dynamic enough. And we saw defenses start to key in on it. Now, once the Rams went down, then they kind of opened things up, and we saw, Braden throw for 300 plus yards in each of those last 3 weeks, but it was basically all after, going down double digits, and they found a way to come back and win that Utah State game. But, Braden, in terms of the passing offense, at least, when he's been in a rhythm the most consistently throughout his career, it has been in those scenarios where they have spread things out, where they've stretched the field a little bit more, where they've gone tempo. Now, I think defensively, the fact that there was such a disconnect between Freddie Bank and Norvell, and he just openly didn't trust them. I mean, he's let us know how he's felt about that situation pretty openly since last December, even going into the bowl game, basically saying, like, we had to change our entire offense because we didn't trust these dudes to get stops after what we saw in 2023. And, based on the results and how some of those games played out against UNLV, against Hawaii, against CU and Boulder, there was some validity to that. But there's a ceiling with that type of play when you're not really striking any fear into the defense, unless you've just got like an all-world offensive line and all-pro running backs, and you can just run it down their throat 50 times a game. All the power to you. Most offenses aren't able to do that week in, week out. You've got a quarterback in year 3. You've got some speed. You've got some versatility within your personnel at receiver. I think you can attack teams in a variety of different ways. Can you find a way to get all these guys in the mix? Can you get Tommy Maher the ball, underneath and across the middle? Can you go vertical with Tay Lanier and some of these bigger bodied type receivers? Can you get those tight ends consistently, across the middle of the field, which I think was a big element of the passing offense that was lacking last year. And there's a reason, it wasn't as consistently dynamic, like that. The loss of Dallin Holker, it was felt. It was closer to 2022 where you just didn't have that element of your offense. And I think all of these things together, like there's a chance that this offense is the most versatile group that we've seen to this point. If you can build off of some of the things you've done well at various points, but find a way to establish some consistency, and instead of having it be like 2023 where you throw the hell out of the ball but can't run the ball, or last year where you run the ball but struggle to throw with consistency, can you just find some middle ground there, find a little bit of stability, build off of what you've done well in the last 2 years, kind of take the best of both worlds? Like I really feel like there's a possibility that we look up and this is a team that, scores 30 plus points a game, and they're a lot more fun, and they're a lot closer to what was envisioned when Norvell was hired in the first place. But we shall see. Last year they came into camp looking closer to what we had seen in spring as well as the 2023 season. And then about 10 days before camp, just completely change the offense. What does it look like this fall? You know, I've already come out and said a couple of times, but just in case you guys missed those pods, it does seem like it is going to be Norvell that's the play caller. Mummy was the play caller in spring, but you know, even just based on how Norvell handled things when he was asked about it, you could always tell it was kind of an odd dynamic. So it does seem like it is going to be Norvell unless things change again. I guess we shall see. I'll give you guys as much up-to-date information as I can. But what does that offense look like? We shall see. I just think it's a big factor. Lamar says, it feels like toward the end of last season, Norvell took the ball out of BFN's hands. Why do you think that happened? I don't think he took it out of Braden's hands per se. I think it was just a product of the circumstance. First of all, the offense was supposed to be very much centered around Torrey Horton to a point where like they were going to force feed him the ball. Now, part of that is because he's the best player on the field. You know, the other guys in that receiver room, they've got great potential, and some of them are still here. Some of them are gone now, and I'm not trying to put those guys down. You know, Caleb Goody is a freak athlete. You cannot coach that type of burner speed. He's got a lot of room to grow as a route runner. There were some drop problems throughout the receiving core last year. They've got to be more consistent with their route running. I just think between Norvell not trusting the defense, between not having Torrey Horton out there, who you just know is so reliable, he's going to make those plays for you. I do think they got a little bit gun shy with the offense. Also, you know, Avery was running the ball really well. So like when things are going well, it's clicking, you're winning. It's hard to then stray away from that. The problem was, like I said a couple of minutes ago, by the end of the season, it all just got a little bit too predictable. And then you were getting in situations where, you know, you're not sustaining drives and your defense is starting to give up points. You know, you're not doing the things well in terms of ball control that you did earlier in the season. And now that limited offense just, it didn't put you in a position where you were explosive enough to, you know, beat the Fresno States of the world, or shoot, even Miami of Ohio and the Arizona Bowl, as we found out. But what does that offense look like? How much does Norvell open it up? I think that is not just the biggest question for camp, but really one of the biggest questions for this entire season, along with, you know, does Norvell earn that extension? You know, what does the future of the program look like? All of that fun stuff. What does the run game look like? I do want to know, what is that balance going to be, both in terms of style and scheme, but also in terms of workload. Again, you know, I mentioned earlier, I don't feel like Marshall, as intriguing and as productive as he's been, I don't think he's a, you know, 200 plus carries per season type running back. Could be an instance where you've got like three guys all, you know, with around 100, you know, give or take a few there. How healthy is Jackson Warren? You know, he looked pretty close to being 100% in spring, was out there participating, making plays in a red jersey, albeit, you know, he was non-contact, but there were a couple of moments where he went up and, you know, they threw the ball up and he's able to make a play in the middle of the field. It's just different. Like when you got a 6'7" guy that can move that well, he's savvy too, you know, former quarterback. Him and Braden have lived together. They've got a strong relationship. The chemistry is good there. And with as productive as Rocky Beers looks like he can be, you can't double them both. You know, like I just think there's a world where they throw some 2 tight end sets out there, and they really put the defense in a tough spot, because I just don't know how you account for all that size, particularly with guys that move well. If he can stay on the field, I think his potential both in the red zone, with just being a security blanket, you know, it's 3rd and 6, you put him in the middle of the field, little comeback route, like he's going to be able to shield off defenders in a way that other guys can't, just because they're not 6'7", you know, 250 pounds. Like, he's a big dude. He runs well. He's got good hands. He's a good athlete. I think the tight ends are one of the most exciting elements of this offense, as well as, you know, having that veteran quarterback with great arm talent and a running back stable that's diverse and has guys that can attack, you know, in a variety of different ways. I want to see if the wide receivers that stood out in spring are the same wide receivers that are going to be in play this fall again. I think based on the roster construct and just based on who was already here versus who came in the summer, like I don't think there's going to be a lot of guys, but I mean, you never know. Can any of these freshmen make a name for themselves? Can somebody like Clarence Taylor break out, who had absurd high school numbers. Can Jordan Ross solidify himself as that number one receiver? I've said this a couple of times now. I don't know if you have a Rashard Higgins, if you have a Torrey Horton on this roster in terms of, that's a bona fide NFL player. But I do think you've got a lot of intriguing guys who, under the right circumstance, could be very good players and potentially even develop into NFL receivers, a la a BC Johnson. I've known BC a long time. Him and Barry Wesley, they played youth football with my brother growing up. I saw those kids in middle school. I saw them in high school. You would have never thought those kids were going to play professional football, but they were good athletes and they worked their tails off. And, by the time the end of their college careers came around, they were pros. And I just think there's a couple of guys that could potentially fit that mold this year. One of the guys I'm really excited about is Tay Lanier. Could have been a Ram a couple of years ago, ends up going to Northern Arizona after a brief stop at New Mexico. Comes full circle. They end up getting him. Shout out Chad Savage in that relationship. A couple of guys the Rams pulled in the portal last winter, thanks to Savage being here. Fortunate that USC didn't come swipe him before the spring, I think. We'll see how that all kind of plays out moving forward. But, what does this wide receiver room look like? Because I think they've got a solid group, and I think being less dependent on one individual will be a good thing, more or less, for the team. It's nice when you just have an elite superstar like that, but I think it can limit your creativity, and I think it can put you in a box when you're so dependent on one individual for the offense to be what you want it to be. I mean, it is what it is. When you've got a great talent like that, you just do it because you want to get that guy the ball. But last year, I just feel like we felt the downside of that when Torrey went down. How does the D-line look with so many new moving pieces? I saw a little back. Josh had a question, or he said, I want to see how Danius Jackson contributes. It's been a long time since we've had a true nose tackle, defensive tackle with his size. That was one of the things that I felt like after the spring, was that the Rams seemed a little bit light in the trenches. I'm fine with where they're at linebacker. Losing Chase Wilson was a bummer. But I think some of the guys that, like Owen Long, who played last year, are going to be studs for you. And I like some of the guys they brought in the portal. But they felt a little light, particularly in the interior. You go out and you get not one, but two 300-pound defensive tackles, including Jackson, who comes over from Kentucky. Is he going to be the real deal, or is he a guy who's just big and takes up space? We've seen that happen in the past too. And just being realistic, like, there's a reason these guys weren't seeing the field. But, if he can play, that size is obviously going to go a lot further in the Mountain West than it does in the SEC. It's just going to stand out more. So I'm excited to see what he looks like as well. Joey says in the Twitter chat, every year around this time, Norvell to the fan, season ticket holders, media, we're going to get back to the air raid and open it up more. Same old story. 8 wins the bar in 2025. We shall see, man. We shall see. You've definitely got a tougher schedule. I don't really feel like they had that phrasing last year. I'd have to go back and look, but also we probably weren't asking because we just assumed it was going to be building off of what they did in 2023. And I mean, when you threw for over 4,000 yards in 2023, it's not like it's total BS. And as much as people roll their eyes, like, you have to factor in the portal and the revolving door that it's been at wide receiver for the Rams, both with the lack of offensive success, both with your criticism of BFN. Like, that's not to say he's above criticism or that he hasn't had moments where he just has not played well enough. But, like, it's hard to get some chemistry going to build off of what you did the year before when you're constantly having to change the pieces, when Torrey can't stay on the field because of, his injury struggles. And, I just think back to, like, Nevada and those offenses late in the Norvell tenure. That took like 3 years to get to that point. We keep getting guys that break out and have the initial flash, and then they don't stick around long enough for it to all come to fruition. Like, if it weren't for the portal, we'd be going into this year assuming, he could have stayed out of trouble and all that. But like Lewis Brown and Justice Ross Simmons and Caleb Goody, like, that's a lot of receiving talent we've seen just go out the door these last couple of years. That is going to factor in to the lack of consistency with the passing offense. There's just no way that it's not going to. I, like everybody, don't want last year to be the ceiling. It needs to be the floor for the program. But I do think there are some factors that you have to consider in all of this when you are comparing eras, and the game is just so different right now than it was even 5 years ago. And I get it, like, it is what it is, evolve or die. But there's a reason, or there's at least logical things you can point to that explain why the offense hasn't been exactly what was envisioned when Norvell came over from Nevada. Just trying to be fair about the situation. Like, again, we all have high hopes and standards, but you've got to be realistic about it all as well. How does the secondary hold up? I think it's going to be a big question throughout the entire season, not just fall camp, but there's just so many new pieces. I mean, it's basically just Hector. I guess Dylan Phelps played quite a bit for you in the conference slate last year, but he's moving to the nickel. Aiden Hector's moving from nickel and slot to more of a free safety. You have a true sophomore and AJ Noland out there. That's strong. Your true outside corners likely going to all be transfers. Lamondre Joe, Jahari Rogers, CJ Blocker, all those guys moved well in the spring. All of them are very intriguing, but how does that kind of shape up, and how consistent are those guys? It's going to be a big factor with CSU and wanting to be a much more aggressive unit under Tyson Summers. You want to send pressure, you've got to have corners that can hold up in coverage, and that hasn't really been the case for CSU historically. We're hoping this year is going to be different. They've definitely brought in a different caliber of athletes, but just because you can run fast doesn't always mean you're a dynamic corner. So again, we shall see. The last question I have before I throw out just kind of some individuals. Again, if you got questions, comments, keep them rolling. I'll get to as many as we can. What does the kicking game look like? It was horrible in spring, as bad as I've ever seen it. I was dead set that the starting kicker could not be on the roster at the time. Not trying to take shots at anybody. It was just not a good spot. They went out, got, what is his name, Hankerson or whatever from Baylor. I think, he should be solid. Got a big leg. Hankinson, can he be even close to what Jordan Noyes was for you these last couple of years? If that's the case, feel really good about the kicking game. But I want to see it in action because I haven't had a chance to see him in person yet. Has had a nice career. You love that he's been a guy who started, multiple seasons, played in big games, hit game-winning kicks, all that's not going to be scared of the lights or anything like that. But has had some consistency struggles at times throughout his career. There's a reason he was in the portal. There's a reason all these guys left their old program, and usually it's just because it wasn't necessarily what they were hoping for. Lamar wants to know, are we concerned about Norvell being poached for a 500 season or him being fired for a 6-6 season? I mean, I think really both of those scenarios are in play at this point, right? Like if you don't build off of what you did last year, that's going to be a tough sell for a fan base who as a whole have seemed pretty, skeptical. And I've talked about the inability to win the big games and how much that's factored into all of this, and what we experienced in the Bobo era still looming large. I think there's a very realistic world in which, this team comes out of the gate hot. If you start like 3-1, if you could beat Washington State and UTSA, earn some style points, now you're feeling really good, and you've got a reasonable schedule to begin the league slate. You finish tough, but I think starting strong is going to just be huge and is going to probably have implications not just for this season but beyond. If you're sitting there at like 2-4 through 6 weeks, like you're going to be in a pretty tough spot. You're 4-2, you're 5-1. That's a completely different conversation. At this point, I really feel like everything is in play for CSU. Josh says, need those underneath crossing routes back in as a major part of the offense. I focused on this in a piece I published for Diehards the other day when I was talking about some of the position groups and just the inability to throw the ball over the middle of the field last year and how much that impacted things. You go back and look at 2023, and part of it is because the attention that Torrey's taken over the top, but LB, Justice Ross Simmons, they just killed teams with crossers all game long. It was a huge part of what they did well in that CU game in Boulder. You've got to have that. You've got to be able to stretch the seam a little bit more with tight ends. It just makes the defense have to be on their heels that much more. And when that factor's not in, it makes it easy to to use the sidelines and, you know, kind of pin the receivers that way. And then you're keying in on the run game. Like, it's, again, we just got very predictable. They knew we weren't going to throw in the middle of the field. You know, you didn't have much going in terms of the vertical passing game. They've got to change things up. You know, they've got to get that back into the mix here. Taylor wants to know, does Summers run a 3-4 defense primarily? They're kind of multiple. They're going to throw a lot of different looks at teams. They're going to be in a lot of nickel and stuff at times too. So you will see quite a bit of 3-4, more than a 4-3, I would say. But I think they're going to be in nickel quite a bit, and, you know, some dime packages and stuff like that. I mean, that's one of the selling points from Norvell on Summers, is that you're going to be a little bit multiple with the way you're able to attack teams defensively and the different schemes you can throw at them. Mark says his size reminds me of Albuquerque native and high school quarterback Zach Gentry, who played at Michigan for 4 or 5 years in the NFL. I assume you're talking about BFN there. We've got a 6'6" Australian punter. We do. He is swole. Lamar says, are you confident that Norvell's the guy over the next 3 to 4 years? I don't know. I believe in Norvell as a coach. So, like, do I think he's a guy who could find some success over the next couple of years? I do. Do I think it's a guarantee? I don't, for a lot of reasons. I think the fact that we're going to the Pac-12 looms large. I think there's more pressure because of it. I think the success of the basketball program has put more pressure on football to succeed and live up to the moment. I think they have to earn some style points this year in the games that matter. Last year was a great step in the right direction. You won a couple of rivalry games. I'm not going to apologize for shit. I'm so tired of people being like, Air Force wasn't that good. I don't care. Air Force beat a ton of mediocre CSU teams, never apologized for it. So did Wyoming, so did CU. You won some games that mattered. It was a step in the right direction, but you both started and ended the season incredibly anticlimactically. You completely laid a dud, you know, in the showdown. That mattered. The performance in that game mattered. The performance in the bowl game mattered, especially after coming up short for the conference championship game. You would have earned yourself a lot of goodwill, even if you didn't win the league, just beating Fresno and getting to the title game last year. And then, you know, having a better showing in the bowl game would have been so big. And instead you have a lot of people in wait and see mode. And, you know, I can't sit here with a straight face and say, I know that he's going to be the guy in 3 to 4 years, and I know it's going to work out. Do I believe he's a good coach that came in and stabilized and is a great recruiter? Yeah, I do. But at the end of the day, you got to win these games that matter, and you've got to do it with consistency. And they've got an opportunity here to do it, to earn some style points this year. But, you know, like, if you would have asked me in 2017, going into the bowl game, after the bowl game, I had a little bit of, I don't know. But even like after everything that happened in the Boise State collapse, losing in Laramie the way they did to Josh Allen in 2017, I still believed that Bobo was a brilliant offensive mind who had some bad injury luck, who lost some fluky games early in his tenure, and that there was a world in which things could even out. And you know, if they built off of what they were doing well and they fixed some of the things they were struggling, there was a world where the Bobo era went completely different. And I still believe that. I know a lot of people roll their eyes. I think if Colin Hill doesn't get hurt, I just think the entire tenure goes significantly different. And maybe that's more about how much I believe in Hill than Bobo per se. But I do think Bobo is a brilliant offensive play caller who had some bad defenses and some bad luck. But regardless, like, all of that was to say in 2017, I still had hope that things could turn around. And as of now, I still have hope. Now, you come out in September and it's what we've seen the last 3 Septembers. It's going to be really hard for me to feel confident that things are going to be good. You have to start strong this year. You can't get curb stomped by Washington State, a team who's going to be your peer the following year. You know, it's not, oh, we're playing a Pac-12 team. We are going to be a Pac-12 team. Like, you've got to shine when the lights are brightest. And that's the next step for the evolution of this program. And that, you know, starts this year with winning those types of games, by beating UTSA at home, by showing something, anything against Washington. And then, you know, in the league slate, you've got some games, you know, Wyoming and Air Force, obviously. But how do you look against Boise and UNLV? You know, I think a lot of this is still TBD. And I think if you tried to come on here and say definitively, he's the guy or he's not the guy. I don't think he can at this point. I know that's a little bit of a cop out, but that's just kind of what I think is the deal going into this year. We are in overtime, so if you'd like to watch the rest of the show, if you're watching on TV, go to thednvr.com. All right, I'll answer a couple more questions, comments as we get out of here. Joey B says, Clint Kubiak 2030, the clock is ticking to come back to Fort Collins, LOL. How about a Clint Gary Kubiak, father-son, head coach, offensive coordinator, Ram program in a few years? I think Gary is past his prime. I don't know if he's not even like he would be too old to do the job, but like I just don't think somebody at his stage of life is going to want to deal with the chaos of college football. And frankly, with either of the Kubiaks at this point, both are coordinators in the NFC West. Those are better gigs than being college coaches, man. It's just hard to be a college coach, especially if you're not at a school with crazy resources. The recruitment process, player retention, all of it's kind of a nightmare. I'm really hoping some things kind of change and we get closer to an NFL structure with free agency and how all this is going to work in the coming years. Because frankly, I don't know how some of these college coaches do it. I just don't. It's a tough gig. I know they make good money, but it is a tough gig. Some players I'm going to keep an eye on, and we'll do this briefly because I've been rambling on. Jalen Dupree, I'm super high on him. I think a world in which Jalen Dupree breaks out, very much like what I've said with BFN having a career year. I think if those two things happen, that greatly increases CSU's likelihood of, being an actual contender, winning double-digit games, all that type of stuff. Averaged 6.1 yards a carry as a true freshman last year, only 25 carries, so a small sample size. But he pops, man, and it's just a different spark when he is on the field. Rushed for nearly 7,000 yards and 93 touchdowns in his high school career. Just absurd numbers. Jordan Ross, can he be that number one guy? Everything I've seen in terms of him and the work he's putting in behind the scenes, everything I've heard from the coaches, he's very much cut from that Torrey Horton cloth. You don't have to worry about him being a distraction. The dude just puts his head down and grinds. Can this be the year, he lives up to that 4-star ranking? I think it's possible, and I think it'd be huge for the offense. I want to see what AJ Nolan looks like. Had a great spring. Again, I expect him to start at safety. Love his athleticism. I think that's going to be something that stands out with the defense as a whole this year. More athletic in that back end, more speed, and more range. What does Taj Bullock look like? I don't think he comes over from Akron without some type of plan. Maybe it's all financial. Maybe it was, I'll just take a bag to come over there. He's been a really productive rusher throughout his career, though, and I think there's a world in which you could get him even like almost a rushing touchdown a game, like depending on how you want to play things. I think he takes some of those wildcat plays that we saw Izzy run last year. Jay liked that stuff, especially in short yardage scenarios and in the red zone. What does it look like with Bullock? And then finally, Jackson Brousseau and Darius Curry, who is the true backup quarterback by the time week 1 rolls around. Going into 2022, BFN was third string, and by the end of camp, he had earned that second string spot based on what he had done in fall camp. And obviously then Clay gets hurt and he kind of takes the job from him and never looks back. But what happens there? Because I think that could have an impact of who is on the roster come December. I think the likelihood of all 3 quarterbacks still being on the roster at this time next year is pretty unlikely. That's just the way that the game works in 2025. So those are kind of some guys that I have my eye on in camp in particular. Again, I will be on vacation for a couple days next week, so I won't be there every single day in fall camp, but I basically will be there for the entirety of it. I will have Norvell in studio. I'll be there for practice throughout the season. I'm really looking forward to it. Much love, y'all. I appreciate everybody for rocking with us. Appreciate everybody, even in the dead of summer. We made it through the slowest time of year being into CSU. We had some of our best numbers in the summer that we've ever had, and I just really appreciate all you guys. Shout out to our producer, Dion, making everything work so smoothly behind the scenes. He's been absolutely killing it. Thank you for listening to the DNVR Rams podcast presented by Branded Bills. Head to brandedbills.com. Use that code BBDNVR for 15% off of your first order. Much love, y'all. Always proud to be. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.